All right, so we've taken some time to talk about the best of New York Toy Fair 2019. Now it's time to talk about the most disappointing. Hey guys, I'm Pixel Dan, and once again, I posed the question to my viewers on Patreon. I said, guys, we talked about the best things. What were the things that you were most disappointed about coming out of Toy Fair 2019? What was the worst of the show? And I'm sure that everybody out there has their own things that they were most disappointed about. So of course, if yours isn't on this list, let's talk about it in the comments. Feel free to post it down below and we will discuss. But without further ado, let's talk about what we felt were the worst and most disappointing things coming out of New York Toy Fair. So the first one is definitely mine. This is definitely one of mine. But a lot of people also reached out to me afterwards and asked if I had any info. And unfortunately, the info is Grocery Gang from Moose Toys is done. Man, I was a big fan and big supporter of this wacky line of food dudes. It was just a fun toy line. I thought it was really cool, really reminiscent of the original Food Fighters toy line, which is one of my all-time favorite wacky toy lines from the 80s. Had a ton of fun collecting those, had a ton of fun reviewing those. There was no presence of them at Toy Fair whatsoever, and when I asked the representative at Moose Toys if Grocery Gang was done, they just kind of looked at me with that little sad look on their face and they said, "We have no plans for Grocery Gang." Who knows? Maybe one day they will come back. They definitely took a couple years off between Trash Pack and Grocery Gang, which were essentially the same line. So maybe it'll come back in some different name at some point. But unfortunately, Grocery Gang looks like has come to an end. The next thing that a lot of people said they were really disappointed about was the overall lack of DC Comics product in action figure form. Now, this is one of those things I kind of warned everybody going into Toy Fair, because we got those big announcements that Mattel was on the final year with DC, and then the license was going to be going to Spin Master and McFarlane Toys. So I kind of told you guys ahead of time that we probably weren't going to see much for DC, and it looks like I was right. Mattel had a very, very small, very lackluster showing for DC product in their showroom. They really only had like a lot of the big figs, the big cheap stuff, and it was mostly focused on Shazam. They did show a new wave of multiverse, but it wasn't anything that I think a lot of people are super excited about. So there was some disappointment there. Plus, on top of that, Spin Master and McFarlane both had no info on DC yet. And I told you guys it would be too early for that. But I think people just, it's a downside. If you're a DC fan and a DC collector, this is a kind of a weird transition year for you because there's not going to be a whole lot going on this year while things are ramping up for the new licensees to take over. So we're just going to have to wait and see what happens next year. Here's another big one. This is another big one because so many people were asking me for info and updates on this, and there was nothing. There is no news on Thundercats Classics. In fact, Mattel's overall showing was pretty poor, and we're going to come back to that. But there is nothing, no news on Thundercats Classics. And I really hate to say this, I really hate to do this, but I think we're kind of at a point where we're going to have to let that go. It doesn't seem like it's happening at all, guys. I don't really have any other inside information on this, and people ask me all the time. But you got to remember that this was brought up during PowerCon, that they showed it off and they were trying to gauge interest. And it seems to me like there's a lot of interest for this stuff, but there has been no news on this from Mattel ever since. Plus, a lot of the folks aren't even at Mattel anymore. So I don't know. I don't think Thundercats is really going to be moving forward with Mattel. I want it to so bad, so I hope I'm wrong, but there was no news on Thundercats, and I know a lot of people are really disappointed in that. Up from that, still on Mattel, there was nothing for the new Netflix She-Ra cartoon. Now look, the Netflix She-Ra cartoon has a pretty big following, and even if it's something that you're not interested in, a lot of people were asking me if there was going to be new toys on display, because the heavy rumor was that Mattel was supposed to have these figures on display at the show. They had nothing, nada. Now, when I kind of poked around and asked, basically I just kind of got that, yeah, they're coming, it'll be fall sometime. But that is literally all I got out of them. So I have no info, no news. They showed nothing off for this, and that seems really strange considering Season 2 is getting ready to start pretty soon, and we have no word on toys still. So that's going to bring us to the final thing, the final most disappointing thing from New York Toy Fair, which is just Mattel in general. Yeah, that's right. Mattel's entire presence was pretty much unanimously voted on as being the most disappointing thing from New York Toy Fair. We already talked about how they didn't have anything new for Thundercats. They had barely anything for DC Comics. They didn't have anything new for She-Ra, but like their entire presence in general was just so lackluster to previous years. Now, I know that they do a huge focus on their retail items. It makes total sense for something like New York Toy Fair. But as mentioned, usually in the past, they've always done collector events as well, and they skipped out on that entirely this year. Their Jurassic World display had a couple cool new things, but was so small compared to last year's Jurassic World display. And where were those 6-inch figures from Jurassic World that we saw revealed back at Comic-Con? We got no news on those. There was no Mega Construx Castle Grayskull on display, which everyone was expecting to see. In fact, Mega Construx barely had a presence at all, with the only things they really showed were the new Breakout Beasts, which granted looked great, and the new Detective Pikachu sets. Everything else, totally missing for Mega Construx. They had a big focus on Toy Story, which makes sense, but those toys are already in stores right now, so there really wasn't a whole lot of brand new information there. Just the overall presence felt really weak from Mattel, and I can totally understand why a lot of people were really underwhelmed. We literally got nothing for the collectors, but we also didn't get a ton of new stuff as far as regular retail stuff goes. The overall presence from Mattel was just, I don't know, when you compare it to what Hasbro did, it's like night and day, and it was really a bummer. So there you go, my friends. That is our list of the worst of New York Toy Fair 2019. There was a lot of great stuff, and of course, I already did a best of video, so make sure you check that out as well, because let's not dwell on the negatives. Let's think about all the great stuff that was there, and you know what? Next year, it could be completely different. Things might turn around. We might get some cool new news on some of this stuff that we didn't get here. And San Diego Comic-Con is coming up soon, July. And that's when a lot of these companies bring out a bunch of new stuff. So time will tell. Until next time, my friends.